I want to start out with this picture. This is a picture of a building in Greenpoint. It's a green roof outside of it. This is a very industrial area, and you can see the view of New York in the background. And what you're looking at through those windows is bird safe glass. So those lines there, it's a simple film application. It makes all the difference in the world. That's what we're going to talk about today. So before I jump into it, I want to talk a bit about New York City Audubon. What we do is we work to protect wild birds and their habitats in the 5 boroughs. We just stick to the 5 boroughs. And we do it to improve the quality of life for all New Yorkers, as well as to obviously protect the birds. We are an organization. We have, sometimes we're a little bit different than other Audubon societies because we have dedicated staff. We have 13 dedicated staff members, between 13 and 15, several seasonal technicians, and then an army of volunteers that we engage. All of our work is based in conservation science, so every bit of advocacy that we do is going to be based on some research that we're doing. We also do a lot of engagement, so we have about 350 outings or bird walks a year around the city, and there's so much to see in the city. I mean, the birding in the city is incredible, as I'm sure many of you know. But I'm going to talk about conservation and what that looks like in New York City. And oftentimes when I mention it, well, oftentimes the first thing I hear when I mention my name and working as Audubon, people are like, really, you know? So that's kind of the first thing that comes up. The second thing is, what is conservation in New York City? And if you look at what New York City was and what it is now, it's a reasonable question. But I want to point out that this is right along the Atlantic Flyway and the diversity of habitats that are here and that are still kind of relic around. So there are so many birds that migrate through this area. There is a serious opportunity to conserve them by making the city safer. It's mostly glass and concrete. There's also incredible habitat still surrounding the city. The New York Harbor has one of the largest breeding populations of wading birds, and it's critically important. Our work extends from basically we like to say the beaches of the Rockaways, where there are piping plovers and American oyster catchers that we work with, to the rooftops of Manhattan, where we're working on green roofs to increase bird habitat. But one of our cornerstones of our work is Project Save Flight. So it's looking at this concrete and glass matrix and making it safer for birds. So the program officially started in 1997. I didn't have a name back then, but people started noticing. We had, I think it was a board member noticed a bunch of birds on the sidewalk. Kind of to Patrick's story of people just started seeing these birds and it was an issue. And since then, it's grown to one of the largest projects that we have. So now every spring and fall, we have about 120 volunteers that wake up at 6 a.m., well, before 6 a.m., and they go out and they walk the streets of New York City between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. every morning before work. Go out there, collect dead and injured birds, transport them to the rehabber, and they record very detailed data about collisions. So, for example, this is how we now track collisions at one of the sites downtown. We have route maps that the volunteers will walk, and we can record information about where the worst facades are, where we should be focusing our efforts to get bird-friendly glass in place. So this is this is one of the major projects that we do, but it feeds into so much of our work. And the reason we do this, and I know you're all birders, but I'm going to talk a bit about migration. Most birds in this area migrate at night. So the vast majority of the migratory birds migrate at night. So the sun sets, they all take off. They fly. It's less chance of predation, easier kind of lower winds. So they migrate through. And the scale of this is amazing. So right through New York, right through Westchester, we'll have millions of birds moving through. This is an example of this is from Birdcast in September 2022. You can see how many birds are moving. You're about to pass right through this area, where I just passed through, actually. Now, this was pointed out by Patrick, that artificial light is incredibly disruptive. The image here, again, is the image of the 9/11 tribute. And it's those bright lights that turn on. This is a bit of an extreme example, but what we've seen through monitoring the site for years and working with the tribute to turn the lights off when too many birds build up, is that birds will change course from up to 5 miles away and get pulled to the city because of the bright lights. So what happens then? They get pulled into urban areas where there's not much green space. There's a lot of concrete and glass. The sun comes up and they need to stop and eat. Essentially, they need to refill their stores so they can keep migrating. And that's when they get into trouble. And now the threat of windows is very real. we've all heard this, the nearly 1 billion birds die, but what does that mean? Like, how do you picture that? It's one of those really extreme conservation numbers that you hear, but it's kind of abstract, right? I mean, I work in this and it's hard to imagine what the scope of this is. So I want to share some brief images that are hard to see, but they demonstrate the reality of collisions. So this 1 billion birds dying, that doesn't include birds that are injured. This is just for North America. This is a global issue. The 1 billion birds that die each year are just ones from North America. In New York City alone, we estimate that about 250,000 birds die from these collisions. And you can see that this bird here, it's injured. So a lot of these birds don't die right away. A lot of them take some time. It's part of the reason you don't find them, because they can fly off. They can manage to get to a hiding spot before we find them. Now, I apologize for this next video. This next video is very hard to see, but it's an example of one day on a collision monitor's route downtown Manhattan. This was in September of 2021, and this was a mass collision event. Seems like it's on, sorry, here we go. So this is a mass collision event. This is our volunteer, Melissa Breyer, one morning. This is a solid take on her phone. You can see the bag. You can see how many individual birds are being picked up. It's really hard to watch. This was a day with some poor weather. Birds were moving through. You can see the black-throated blue, which Patrick pointed out. The one good thing that came out of this is it got a lot of press. It made people pay attention. But this is the reality of those collisions. These are a few of those birds. This was at the World Trade Center. There were 300 birds found along one facade. So this is a huge issue. So we've been talking a lot about this, but why are windows so dangerous? Remember, I'm from New York City Audubon, so I'm going to show a lot of photos from New York. But this is a good photo because oftentimes, it's hard for us to understand how these birds are colliding, even though I've walked into glass before. I'm sure everyone here has at some point in their life. It's a real threat, and birds don't have the opportunity to grow up around architectural cues. So this is an example at Hudson Yards, and it really does a good job at demonstrating the different risks. So let's start right in the middle here. This in the middle is a fly-through condition. That's a condition birds can't perceive that. They could go right through, fly right through it, not realize it's there, crash there trying to get to the vegetation. You can barely even tell what you're looking at back here in the corner, but these are all reflections. These reflections to us are very real habitat to birds. They try to get into that habitat and they collide after a night of migration. This is just after sunrise in the morning. Also, if you think you've seen all the glass here, there's a section here. This glass railing is actually there. That's all glass. You can kind of see these slight lines going down on the corners. It's nearly invisible to us. It's absolutely invisible to birds. And the irony of this spot is if you look here by the door, look closely and you'll see these number 10s, which are it's the address of the building. Now, those 10s are put in a line right at human head height because we're trying to make the glass human friendly. If that wasn't there, people would walk into the glass. And yet we don't extend that same courtesy to birds. So it's a really striking image, and it does a good job at demonstrating why glass is so dangerous. So again, birds can't perceive the architectural cues that we see. This is a campus just outside of New York City. And we can see that this is obviously a reflection because we have these barriers here in between the panes of glass. But this center part here is what the birds see. It's just habitat, something reflective that they can fly into. Similarly, this is another type of fly-through condition. This is vegetation inside of a building. If a bird is kind of stuck somewhere and needs to see that, I mean, that looks like a great habitat to get food and take a break. They'll try to fly into it. There's glass separating it. They don't see that glass. So that's another major killer. These two things combined are incredibly dangerous. Now, I'm showing a lot of collisions in New York City. We have data from this. I'm showing pictures of this, but where do collisions happen? It's probably what you're thinking right now. It probably seems like it's a city problem. But this was put together by the American Bird Conservancy. What I want you to focus on is while we have high rises here, and this, typical things of city, that's only 0.1% of collisions. Low-rise buildings like the Javits Center that Patrick pointed out, they make up 56.3% of collisions. But residences, these massive number of buildings of homes around the U.S., make up 43.6% of collisions. So this is the vast majority of this problem actually comes, or a large part of this problem actually comes from private homes. So this is a big issue. Private homes and low-rise buildings make up the vast majority of these collisions. All right, so I think we all know that collisions are a big issue, and it's one thing to know what an issue is, but I want to talk now about switch gears and talk about how you can stop it, because we can make this a non-issue. The first thing to do to stop collisions is to make patterns that are, to install patterns on glass that can be perceived to be barriers by birds. So this is kind of a rule of thumb that you can do is basically you can install any pattern on the exterior of a glass that is about 2 inches by 2 inches. I put the 4 inches here because it does work, but it misses things like hummingbirds and kinglets. They'll try to squeeze through sometimes. But essentially, you want to make that glass visible to birds by having something spaced out. Some pattern, it can be lines, it can be dots. Now, this is just kind of a rendition of it, but this is what it looks like in person. So this is a barrier that was incredibly problematic downtown, and a film was applied that then makes this glass visible to bird, and there have been no collision systems was installed. You can actually watch birds fly to it, where they would in the past have just collided right with it. They go to it and just kind of go right over in this almost like cartoonish manner once they get up close. The center here is actually the Javits Center. So after the results were recorded by Patrick and others, and when they were looking at the Javits Center did a major retrofit. All of that glass that you saw was replaced with bird-friendly glass. These little dots here are what makes the glass visible to birds. So this entire building, while it's still all glass, is all bird-friendly glass, and the collisions decreased by about 90%. Also, if anybody's here and they're seeing this as, something they don't want to have on their windows, this example on the right is also bird-friendly glass. So these little circles, you can see them there if you look really closely, and this is zoomed in really close. But most birds see in UV, they see in ultraviolet. We do not. So this film is ultraviolet activated. When the sun hits it, it kind of glows to birds. We don't see anything, but birds will completely avoid this. They perceive, just like these dots, that's what they see that clear film doing. Now I do have to note that UV, I say most birds see UV because dove and raptors cannot. So doves and raptors will still collide with this, but it does a really good job at reducing collisions. Okay, so what can you do to prevent collisions? What are some actions that can be taken? And there are a couple of different ways to look at this. The first thing is kind of across the landscape. What at the landscape level can be done? Then at the local level, what can you do with the individual buildings, and then also at your home? So I'll talk through a couple of suggestions that I have for this. So at the landscape level, one of the things that I'm really excited to hear is being considered by Peter is to try to track collisions and try to look at where collisions are. That's going to go a long way in kind of raising awareness and getting legislative change. And all these things combined are really great options for changing collisions at the landscape level. This image to the right is, I'll share more information in just a moment, but this is the tool we created at New York City Audubon in 2014. This is the website dbird.org. If you go to dbird.org on your phone or on your computer, you can access this site and record collisions. And this is an example of the collisions that happened in 2022 in New York City, in a portion of New York City. Now, there are several caveats with this in terms of how to use it. So this site, because it's open source, this is recording where people find collisions and know about dBird. So it looks like if you look out here, maybe there aren't as many collisions out here. It's probably not the case. What's more likely is that people aren't finding birds because there's fewer people out here, or they don't know about dBird, or they're not being in the same place as the time of a bird's hitting. Whereas Manhattan, there are so many people and there are a lot of active birders. Same with this area of Brooklyn. That's kind of reflective. If I had to guess what the rest of the city looked like, it would probably look very much like this part of Brooklyn here across the whole landscape. But this is a really helpful tool. When we designed this, we wanted to make it easy because we're picturing people walking to work or going outside kind of in a rush. It takes under 1 minute to enter in data. So you can go in, enter data about where you are. If you're on your phone, you can do this and it automatically picks up where you are. and you can enter the species, submit a picture, and it's entered into the permanent database. You don't need to sign up for anything. You do not need to give your email or anything like that. So it's completely private, and it's really great for recording collisions. Sawmill River Audubon just signed up to have their own project here, and they're in good company because about 80 different institutions across North America are now using this to track collisions. And it's been, it's a really helpful tool for figuring out what's happening. So once you kind of track collisions or get information on it, it's really helpful to raise awareness. Talk to your neighbors, talk to people that are around, and help them to learn that this is an issue. A lot of people, I mean, we've all heard that thump on a window. But we go outside and we're like, oh, I guess a bird collided, but it's fine. It's not there. Most birds, they collide, they disappear. They kind of fly off and they die somewhere else. A predator takes them out. Even with the level of research that we have for Project SafeLight, we have dedicated Project SafeLight volunteers. We estimate that we only find between 1% and 3% of the total collisions. So if you're just kind of opportunistically going outside looking for collision victims, you're going to find very, very few of them. Legislative change is a big way to get things to happen to save birds. In New York City, we had the bird safe building requirements passed, Local Law 15 of 2020. This requires all new buildings or all major renovations of the outside of a building, all replacements of the glass facade, to have bird-friendly glass installed. Now, this doesn't add cost to or a burden to the building itself, because there's no difference in cost between bird safe glass, between most bird safe glass and regular glass when you're getting installed at the get-go of a project. Lights out are very important, as we pointed out before. Birds are attracted to the lights. That's great for local legislation. And at the state level, Dark Skies Act has been introduced, and this would require outdoor lighting to be dimmed or turned off during migration. So you can support all these legislative actions. Now at the local level, these are photos of places that buildings we worked with this past year to reduce collisions. So these two sites, Feather Friendly and One Hotel Brooklyn and Brookfield Place, these are buildings that we monitor for collisions. And using that information, we worked with the building to then basically say, hey, if you do something, you can really save this many birds, and we will help to celebrate it. It's something I definitely recommend, is that if you can get a building to do something, celebrate it. They deserve to be celebrated. It deserves to be good news. These are two examples. The Feather Friendly reduced, even though they didn't cover the entire building, collisions were reduced there by nearly 2/3. And this facade, this has the ultraviolet paint film on. It reduced collisions by around 50%. Probably more than that, but it's hard to tell because of the number of buildings around it. Also, as Sawmill River Audubon, you probably have a pretty powerful group of people that would support letters. So you can send letters to buildings that you could identify as being problems. That will help to get them to think that, this is a real issue that people care about.
Dustin, I just want to note that we're getting a few questions, and please give us those questions. And I think it's probably best to have Dustin answer them at the end of his program, but please continue so that we can look at the quay when he's ready and go to those questions. Thanks.
That's good. Yeah. So now I put this together for what can you do at home? Because again, those homes are a big proportion of the total collisions. I was thinking about the best way to do this because there are so many options out there. So what I wanted to do is stack this in order of kind of the least effort. What's the least effort that you could put into this to the most effort? So ignore these images for a moment and just focus on the text here. The easiest thing you could do is, if you have screens on, leave them on. That's it. It's 100% effective. Most birds will avoid crashing into a screen. They can see it. If they do, they're just going to bounce off like a trampoline. Screens are great. The next kind of easiest thing you can do is leave your windows dirty. Do not clean your windows, especially during migration. The more grimy a window is, the better. Just basically, you want to remember, you're trying to make that window visible. You want to try to reduce reflections and make it visible to birds. Kind of the next step, which is the first one that's actually an active thing to do, not just something that you can just leave, is tempera paint or pens. They have these pens that you can go outside. Kind of the image up here on the right is an example of this. Just paint a pattern on your window. Leave it up there for migration. Migration's over. You could scrape it off, or you could leave it if you like it. This will reduce collisions. Try to hit the 2x2 rule, and you'll be good to go. Also, soap is a good option. If you just take a bar of soap and mark it on there. If there's a high migration expected the next day, if you don't want to paint your windows, soap can help make it visible. The problem is if it rains, obviously you have to do it again. Now the next step is kind of where you start getting some level of investment in terms of money, which film is not too expensive, and you can absolutely do it DIY. This is just some image of somebody, how the films are applied. So they come to you in this roll like this. You post them up on the glass. You use a scraper to push them down, and you pull the screen off, and you're left with this image on the right, which is how you get the dots on the glass. These last a very long time. There are a lot of really great options out there, and they do an excellent job at reducing collisions by, in most cases, 85 to 95%. The last thing you can do, which is the most expensive and the most effort, is install bird-safe glass. There are a lot of options available now, both UV and which have UV paint within the glass that birds can see, as well as ceramic frit in the glass. And again, this is not for everyone because it's quite a cost to reinstall new windows on a home. But if you're doing it, consider it. I wanted to point out some bird safe films that I recommend. These are all companies these are all films that work incredibly well. Solix, Feather Friendly, Kaleidoscape, and Bird Divert. Bird Divert is the ultraviolet one. And these are all easily accessed. The cost for getting them is actually rather low. And I think several of them are actually giving away free product to homeowners at the moment. So you can get them for your windows. This is an example of what a UV film can do. So this is what we perceive on the left. On the right is what a bird perceives with that UV ability. Now, there are plenty of field tested products. American Bird Conservancy, we partner with, does an incredible job at testing all of this. They have flight facilities where they actually field test every product that comes out that's marketed to be bird safe. So we have a standardized protocol, or they have a standardized protocol that they can use to test these. And they can post the ratings for the success of the product on their site. They have a whole database. I highly recommend you going to abcbirds.org to look into this. And when they talk about a threat factor, any threat factor under 30 is going to be good enough to significantly prevent collisions. I also want to address a couple of common misconceptions that often come up in conversations like this, and you're probably going to have as you go about talking to your neighbors and other stakeholders. Often people think it's a skyscraper problem. It's not. We've seen that now. People also think that because they heard a bang, they go outside and they don't see it, think that birds are fine. Usually birds will just go slightly out of range to die, or they get picked off by a predator. If a bird's able to survive, usually even birds that are brought into rehabs, they have a survival rate of about 30 to 40%, even being taken care of after they collide. Also, there's some evidence that birds that collide and have usually brain damage cannot even function ecologically. They're not able to make it to migratory grounds. They're not able to breed. So it just, anytime a bird collides, it is pretty horrible for that bird. Bird decals, these things that you see here in this image, unfortunately, they don't work. They work to prevent collisions where the decal is, but because all this open space around it, the birds are still going to try to fly through it. So unfortunately, they don't work. Also, people often ask if closing the blinds can help. It's not. Sometimes it may help a little bit, but most of the time it's not going to do anything, and in some cases it can even make it worse. So for example, here you can see that the reflection is increased as a result of the closed blinds. Here's an example of maybe a pattern that would be visible to a bird, but if you change your angle slightly, this is that same window, just at a slightly different angle. You can see it's just an increased reflection. So what you really need to do, again, is follow these steps and just make the outside of the glass visible to birds. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. And I also wanted to close with this slide because this is actually the Javits Center now. So this is on the Javits Center expansion. There is a 7-acre crane roof on one part of the roof. There's an acre farm on the other side of this this glass building that you see here. There is a orchard that we worked with them to have installed with native plants in it. All of that glass that you're looking at is all bird-friendly glass. So this went from being one of the biggest bird killers in the city to being what we call kind of a bird oasis. We've recorded 51 species of bird actively foraging on this roof. So it's really been a turnaround, and this work can really make some serious change.